I was raised to be a wife and a mother one day. So my whole purpose was to become this godly woman and not to serve my own needs or desires.
As a girl growing up in the church through the purity culture, what I really gained from that was that if I was this amazing Christian woman who loved the Lord and was a good person, then the most I could hope for was God was going to bring me this amazing, godly Christian man.
I was raised in the church. So the idea that these men, pastors, watch over your soul, this was the fishbowl I swam in. This was simply all I knew.
But what Kate, Jules, and Krista didn't know was that the men who claimed to be their guides and protectors cared far less about them than about their own power. Their power over women and their power over the country.
How do you make America great again? You make America Christian again.
We get called, well, you're a Christian nationalist. You want the kingdom to be the government. Yes.
The point of Christian nationalism, my goal, is to break American democracy.
I'm going to be a dictator for one day.
We need total dictator Trump. The Constitution is invalid.
Christian nationalists see themselves as entrusted with this duty to take back the country.
God, we didn't come just to go to church. We came to go to war.
Their plan for winning this war is for Christian men to be aggressive, militantly masculine, even violent. And if they win, American women will be required to give them control of their bodies, just like the Christian women who have already been living under their authority.
My dad would say that he is the prophet, priest, and king of the household. And we were taught that men were strong and powerful and protectors, and they had a lot of positive language to describe the patriarchs. And then women had to be the helpers and to submit.
I have 4 people in my life that I dictate the hours in their day. I dictate what time they go to the bathroom, when we eat, what we wear. Those are the people that I have almost limitless authority with.
Anytime I showed a strong individual desire, then that was shut down. So I had to be quiet and weak just to survive. My whole goal in life was to grow up, get married, and have children. And we didn't believe in things like birth control. So the expectation was that we'd have as many children as possible. And our parents would use us to bring about this change in the country. We would make the country a Christian country.
Godly women want to feed their men. Godly women are designed to make the sandwiches. But this is not an absolute law like the one about making babies.
Christians need to be thoughtful about this with our kids. They're all arrows. They're all to be sharp and they're all to do damage to the enemy. But we want our daughters to grow up seeing what they're for.
We're just going to outbreed these people. We are.
There has been a lot of talk about Christian nationalists' drive to take over the country and about their strict view of the roles of women and men. But what's been hidden until now is that their views of what men and women should be like in the new America are already triggering one of the most shocking sexual abuse scandals in our history.
When you've created a culture where manhood and womanhood is defined by submission and authority, you have created a culture where authority goes unchecked and easily becomes abuse. And so men think they can get away with abuse because they actually can get away with it.
Andy Savage, my youth pastor, was very gregarious. He was a good-looking guy, super fun. And so when he came to my church, everybody was so excited that this charismatic man was coming to bring more kids to Christ and make the youth group a cool place to be. Many of us in the youth group had gone up to church after school one day to hang out. Ultimately, it was going to be me and Andy there, and I didn't have a ride home. And so I remember calling my mom and asking her, is it okay if Andy brings me home? And she said yes. As we were driving home, Andy passed the turn to my house, and I remember asking him, where are we going? And he said, you'll see. Suddenly, he had turned down a dark dirt road and parked the truck and turned the lights off. And the next thing I knew, he was taking his penis out of his pants. And then he suddenly jumps up and runs out of the truck, and he's screaming, oh my God, what have I done? And he tells me, Jules, you have to take this to the grave with you. So in 2018, I finally got the courage to decide to come forward. And I looked up Andy Savage, who was now one of the leading pastors at a mega church in Tennessee, and I decided to write him an email. And I signed off #MeToo.
2 days later was a Sunday, and the head of the church announces to the congregation that Pastor Savage has something he needs to tell them. What happened next was so enraging, I wanted the world to see it. That's when the New York Times put the church's own video online.
I regretfully had a sexual incident with a female high school senior in the church.
He tells the world that it had occurred and that he was sorry. And everybody stands and they give him a standing ovation.
And when you see the congregation standing up and applauding an abuser, which happens over and over, it's very emotionally satisfying to accept quote-unquote repentance, to emotionally identify with the abuser, because what it gives you is this very neat, tidy story of restoration, allegedly. Right? It gives you this pretty little package with a bow on top where you can say, look how beautiful it is, God redeems. And it costs you nothing. It costs you something to side with the vulnerable and the weak and the oppressed. It costs you nothing to side with the one who's in power.
One of the kickers is that I remember them saying, we are saddened to see that Miss Woodson has not been on the same path to healing as Andy. Are you kidding me? This didn't affect him 1 ounce. He was celebrated. You don't just move on after trauma. And when society and the church acts like it didn't happen, disposes of the victims, then it's re-traumatizing all over again. We've had the Me Too movement, but we still see the same toxic crap, excuse my language, happening in the church. There has got to be equality. There has got to be women having a voice.
That's the voice of toxic femininity, right? There's toxicity there, but it's a rebellion against the way God made the world. So God made the world in such a way that the husband is the head, the wife is to look up to her husband, calling him Lord.
They are subjugating half the population, the whole female population. To be able to justify that and rationalize it, with all earnestness and true belief that this is God's will, that is very, very powerful and extremely destructive. You imagine, I'm this 15-year-old goody two-shoes nerd. I've never held hands with anyone. The pastor, right? This is my pastor. He holds the authority of God. He sexually grooms me. He sexually abused me. I'm sexually assaulted over 30 times as a 16-year-old girl. I told the music minister of the church. He told me I should never again speak of it. The senior pastor told me I should rededicate my life to Christ. The pastor who did it made me kneel in his office while he stood over me, praying out loud, hand on my shoulder, praying for God to cast Satan from me, essentially a sort of exorcism. And I slithered out of there feeling lower than I had ever felt. And then I was made to apologize to his wife. I am the girl who was blamed.
Sexuality really is taught as existing only for men. Women exist as a means to an end, the sexual satisfaction of their husbands, or as a danger to a godly man. And then coupled with that is often a strong teaching that this need that men have, this sexual need that men have, is absolutely irrepressible, right? That it's God-given, and that they must have sexual release. And what that really does is it places the responsibility for sexual purity in every single instance squarely on the shoulders of the woman. If something goes wrong, if a man abuses, if he lusts, if he has sex outside of marriage, right? Well, that's the woman's fault.
And he went on to, a bigger and better job at a more prestigious church. I'm sure he had a higher paycheck. And his whole career, he never faced a bit of consequence. When my own daughter approached the same age I had been, I couldn't live with knowing how things were. So that was the start of it.
This massive institutional enablement of horror must be addressed on an equally massive scale.
Any woman who dares to speak publicly, then they will rain almighty hell on you. Some of the people who vilified me publicly were the highest leaders of the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant faith group in this country. These are not just, some deranged, isolated people. No, this is part of the culture of what they do to women who speak out.
Why is it that simply raising your voice about the mistreatment of women in the church and about the reality of sexual abuse in the church is enough to try to categorize you as a demonic influence and to silence your voice?
And then, it all built on itself. When I wrote my first op-ed for the Dallas Morning News, it had my email address at the bottom of the op-ed. I was flooded with stories from other people. I got so many emails saying, "You're the first person I've ever told." That was when I thought, oh, this isn't just one bad pastor or even a dozen. This is a lot.
For all of the years that I carried the secret, I thought that I was the only one. I just did not imagine that this was something that happened often. So imagine my surprise when I find Krista Brown speaking out. Right about the time that I was finding my voice and deciding that I couldn't be quiet anymore. My pastor was Jerry Vines. Pastor Vines became a godlike figure. Darrell Gilliard, Dr. Vines saw something in him. Gilliard was a fiery figure. He's on Jerry Falwell's television program and radio program.
Let's welcome back to our pulpit, Daryl Gilliard.
I want to bring a message this morning entitled Peace Amid the Storm.
Daryl Gilliard found me in our youth group. And when Daryl Gilliard came to me and told me he saw something, it was as if the Pope reached down and said, I see something in you. He basically told my parents even that he wanted to mentor me, that he saw something special in me, which in that world was pride for my parents. What we didn't know is that Daryl had many victims already, had attacked so many other people. One of the nights of the revival, Daryl told me that he needed to speak to me after service. And I asked where. And he asked me to meet at the hotel. He said, be in the open, and that's where everything went haywire. He chased me all the way through the hotel because he was right on my heels. By the time we get to the parking lot and I look back and realize he's still coming and nobody's coming with him, and it is in a dark, desolate area of the city. And just like a horror movie, you can't get your keys in your hand to get into the car. And he's on me from behind, and he's on top of me. Like, again, just like a horror movie, you're just trying to get the key in the lock. And animal instincts kick in, my adrenaline is high and I'm strong. And I somehow finally managed to get the key in, and at the same moment reach back and just shove him. I managed enough to get into the car, but he was still coming. I can see him still in my back windshield as he's trying to leap towards the car. But I got away. And I drove all the way home thinking he's chasing me. My mother was waiting up for me, and she was very angry that I had missed my curfew, and then she saw me, and I just collapsed on the floor. I'd made it safely inside the door and locked the door. My mom decided she was going to call Dr. Vines. That was her first thought. Not call the police. I'm going to call Dr. Vines. Jerry Vines sat while I'm distressed across his desk, having to tell this horrible story. And Jerry Vines looked across the table with absolutely no reaction or no sense of, I can't believe this has happened. There was no sense of fear or worry other than about us telling. And the question was, who else knows? Who else have you told? No one. No one. Just mom. I told my mom. I haven't told anyone else. It's good that you didn't tell anybody. Let's keep it that way. You know, it'd be really embarrassing for you if people knew. It'd be really embarrassing for you if people found out about this. When we left that office that day, we understood that Jerry Vines was calling Paige Patterson and that they were going to move forward in removing him from ministry. Dr. Vines was a very prominent figure, but higher than that was Paige Patterson. I assumed, again, that I was the only one, and I assumed that it would be shocking to both of them, not fully understanding that they already knew.
The church must do the right thing to help Brother Daryl.
Patterson stood in the pulpit and invited Daryl in, and when he came in, you can see this moment of him embracing him like a son. And as they stand there embracing, the audience claps in a standing ovation for the man who just weeks before sexually assaulted me as a teenager.
As to whether or not his total ministry...
But worse, so much worse. Immediately and in that moment, they said they wanted to restore him.
Brother Daryl has asked me to walk with him and others also of his dear friends across this country, including Dr. Falwell, Dr. Vine, in a process of restoration. That's exactly what we intend to do.
If we took Scripture seriously, we would recognize that church leaders are held to a much higher standard. But in reality, we treat them with such a level of deference that there's almost no accountability at all. That's not God. That's not what he's commanded his church to be, and it's certainly not biblical justice.
Finally, years later, he was arrested for crimes against 2 minor girls in his church. So the courage came like a roaring lion, and there was no holding back at that point. I am not going to be quiet again. And so when I called the sex crimes detective, the sex crime detective immediately tells me, it's probably not going to go anywhere. He's too powerful. Her exact words, he's too powerful, and I think these charges will be swept under the rug. You have the Vines and the Patterson, Falwell, all of those voices that don't want this to come out. Again, that lion, I was like, not this time. Not this time. And I said, what do we need? What do we need to make this stronger? And she said, we need more victims. And we need victims that can testify, because these are 2 young girls. And they can't probably stand up to the weight of a prosecution and a trial and all of the things. So that's what I set out to do. I wanted to bring awareness to it. I wanted to go public. So I called every news station in our city and said, I have a story to tell, and I don't want to be off camera. I want to be on it. I want to put a face to it, because these victims can't. They're too young. By the end of the case, there are more than 40 known victims of Gilliard when the state attorney closed their files. I reached out to both Vines and Patterson and said, please do the right thing now. You might not have done the right thing for me then, but continually I asked them, step up now. But instead, what I was told by Jerry Vines was, Tiffany, given a little bit of time, these things tend to just go away. They don't lose sleep over it. They don't even bat an eye.
And they may pat themselves on the back and look at themselves and say, well, I never abused anyone. They did. They did by perpetuating this system.
So there is this need to maintain power at all costs. Whatever casualties come are just casualties. It's just part of war. That's their mentality. And they have completely lost their actual role as pastors and shepherds in their power war.
Ezekiel 23:30 said, God looked for a man to stand in the gap, but none was found. God found one in Donald J. Trump.
And we are coming on the air with news about former President Donald Trump, as a jury in New York has found that Trump sexually abused and defamed E. Jean Carroll and awarded her $5 million in damages.
In a unanimous, historic verdict, he's been found guilty of 34 separate charges after he paid off a porn star.
I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything.
It may seem surprising that a self-professed moral majority would end up supporting a candidate who has bragged about assaulting women. But if you look inside their own communities, you can see how for decades they have propped up men who have abused power and have excused all kinds of harm, all kinds of abuses for the sake of that power. The ends justifies the means.
I will fight even harder for Christians with 4 more years in the White House. I get in there, you're going to be using that power at a level that you've never used it before.
We wake up tomorrow in a Christian nation. Will women have the right to vote tomorrow if you wave that magic Christian wand?
No.
God doesn't need these people. Let's talk about narcissism. Truly. For you, these men, to think that they are so important to the mission, to God, to the nation, give me a break.
The last and perhaps the most powerful temptation of Jesus was when he was brought up to a high mountain and the devil said to him, I will give you all the nations of the world if you only bow down to me. And Jesus refused. Now, people today are claiming that the church needs to have the power over other people, which it strikes me as exactly the same temptation that came to Jesus on that mountain. And Jesus said no. He said no because power corrupts. It always corrupts.
Hey, want to talk about the insurrection? Let me tell you something. You ain't seen an insurrection yet. My Bible says that the church of the living God is an institution, that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And the Bible says that we'll take it by force.
When people talk about turning the U.S. into a Christian nation, it makes me quake to ponder what that would mean for women in this country. Because I have seen what it means for the largest evangelical Protestant faith group in the country, and it is bloody awful. That is not the country I want.
I feel like Jesus called us to love others. And I think that's what could make America great, is if everyone could come together and realize that we all have differences and we walk different paths, we have different stories, we have different backgrounds, but one common denominator could be that love.
Macho power is not what Jesus calls for. Jesus himself did not operate in that way. Jesus was gentle. He was humble, particularly in his relationship with women. In that way, he told us men what we are to be like. In fact, it's my conviction that that kind of idea that we need to have more power so that we can have our way, or people will say God's way within society, is the exact opposite of what Christ calls us to do.
And I think what we have to grapple with, again, is that the reality that those of us who are raising our voices are not calling for a departure from Christ, but rather a return to who Christ really is.